Hello, everyone. It's Naomi Wolf with DailyClout, and today, as promised, we're reading the Julian Assange indictment and going back over what the First Amendment says and what the Espionage Act says. So many of you know that the reporter slash provocateur slash hacker, Julian Assange, who's been unable to leave the Ecuadorean Embassy for years, was arrested finally by the British police and carried out bodily in a very scary visual face down by 6 or 7 policemen and has been arrested. This is very, very important. I can't stress how important it is for for all of us who care about freedom of speech. And what we're going to do today, because this is DailyClout's job, is to dive deeply. And I don't mean to scare you. As you know, we make these readings easy and clear. I'm going to explain it. I'm going to hold your hand. I'm going to walk you through it. But it's very important to read the actual indictment, which is not long. It's about 6.5 pages. We're going to do that, and I'm going to explain to you exactly what he's being charged with. It's very important. There are a lot of myths out there. And we're also going to briefly talk about the First Amendment and the Espionage Act. So before I get into reading the actual indictment, I just want to remind you guys that the laws about speech in the United States of America, laws that have been replicated because they're so good, right? They're so good around the world in democracies worldwide, are very clear and simple. People try to say, well, it's complicated, or what about hate speech, or what about incitement, which is now all over social media with the Ilhan Omar, President Trump controversy. Whenever you hear these kinds of muddying of the waters, I want you to just stop and pick up your Constitution. And if you don't live in the United States, pick up the United States Constitution anyway, because it is a fantastic model for freedom of speech. Many countries around the world that thought they had free speech right now, Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, are being hammered with restrictions against freedom of speech. So in the United States, this is what, and I'm getting these on social media as I keep reminding people about the First Amendment in the wake of the Assange arrest. And people are saying, well, and also the Ilhan Omar controversy, isn't it hate speech? Isn't it incitement? I just need to say as clearly as I can, we don't like hate speech. But there are laws against incitement to violence already. It's a very specific thing. Incitement to violence is directly calling for violence against someone or directly telling a third party to engage in violence against someone. In the United States, that's the law. Everything else is an imaginary crime, right? It doesn't exist. There is no law against incitement outside of what I just said in speech in the United States. In the US, there are no laws against hate speech. None. There aren't. Hate speech is bad. It's nasty. We don't like it. But literally, there are no laws against it. And I'm saying this as clearly as I can because a generation ago, and certainly the generation coming out of the Second World War, grew up learning about the First Amendment and what everybody said, what my grandmother, whose parents fled pogroms and oppression in Russia, what she cherished about the First Amendment. She always reminded us, it protects the speech you hate. I don't like what you have to say, but I'll fight to the death for your right to say it, is what the last generation or two knew we had to say as Americans. So that's being muddied now. People are trying to say, well, freedom of speech is just for journalists. It's not just for journalists, right? They're trying to say Julian Assange is not a journalist. It doesn't matter. The First Amendment does not just protect journalism, and I'll read it in a second. There's no founding fathers group in the sky that is saying, well, she's a journalist, she isn't. She gets to speak, she doesn't. He's a journalist, he isn't. That's not part of our Constitution. Anyone trying to pull that is trying to trick you or is ignorant. And the other thing we'll get to is that there are things about this indictment that do criminalize journalism. So I'm going to read you the First Amendment, and then I'm going to tell you about the Espionage Act, because these are totally oppositional, right? And the latter, many people say, is unconstitutional. And then we'll get to the indictment. So the First Amendment says, now listen closely, everyone. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, meaning of religion, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Think about that, everyone. I'm going to say that clause again. Thank you for your nice thumbs up. I'm going to say it again because it's so important. This thing is like less than 60 words long. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, meaning you can't say America is a Christian country legally. You can't say it's a Muslim country legally, constitutionally. You can't say it's a Jewish country, right? Congress makes no law about that. And also you can't keep someone from being Muslim or Christian or Jewish or Wiccan or whatever it is they want to be in the United States of America by law, right? The law cannot say we prohibit this religion or we establish this religion. And then it goes on to say so clearly, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Full stop. You can't abridge freedom of speech or of the press in the United States of America. You can't. It doesn't say if you're reporting on classified information. It doesn't say if you're a digital journalist and not therefore a real journalist. It doesn't say if people don't like you. It doesn't say if you're really mean, if you're a Nazi, if you're printing hate speech. No law, okay, no law abridging freedom of speech or of the press. You can print anything. Now, people have asked me, are there no exceptions? Yes, there are reasonable exceptions, beautifully reasoned, limited exceptions. Courts have ruled that if you directly call for violence, as I mentioned, that is incitement to violence, that's illegal. And courts have also ruled that if you engage in a pattern of verbal harassment in the workplace, that's another crime, that's harassment. And there are other crimes you can commit with words, famously yelling fire in a crowded theater. But apart from those narrow carve-outs, right, which are, exceptions are challenged in court constantly. The First Amendment is super clear, and you write that down, you keep it on your pillow, you carry it around in your pocket, because this right is under threat. It's under threat around the world, it's under threat in the United States of America, and people are counting on you to forget the First Amendment and to get confused by what they're saying. So then let's fast forward to 1917. In 1917, and people are saying how many are watching, and I've got 14. But I'm just going to plow ahead, because if you don't watch live, you can watch on YouTube or on DailyClout. In 1917, of course, there was a drumbeat for the United States to enter into war, into the First World War. And there were a lot of isolationists and there were a lot of pacifists. And a lot of Americans didn't see the point of devoting young men's blood and treasure to fighting this war in Europe. And there was outspoken pacifism. It's not our war, it's not our fight. Well, that was inhibiting military recruitment. And the decision had been made by the powers that be that we were going to war. And I'm not saying whether that was the right fight or it wasn't, but the point is, in order to get around the fact that people were being persuaded that it was not their war and they shouldn't sign up, the Espionage Act was passed. So the Espionage Act is a horrible, horrible piece of legislation, totally unconstitutional. The Espionage Act criminalized, basically it criminalized, it prohibited freedom of speech that was, it prohibited, quote, listen to this, any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about the form of government or the United States, including any criticism of the flag of the United States. So that is a stupid, stupid law. It's obviously unconstitutional, right? What's scurrilous speech, right? What's profane speech, right? These are very subjective terms, and it clearly violates the First Amendment and the Constitution. But before it could be retired as a law, elites found it very useful. And so what did they do? What people always do when they're in power, when they have a law against freedom of speech, they started rounding up editors, journalists, critics of the war, pacifists, anti-war activists. Then what the heck? They started rounding up union leaders. There were mass arrests. There were deportations, right? And as the years proceeded, and certainly there was silencing of anti-war criticism, and we went to war, and that was that. After that point, with all these people in prison, if you were not 100% for World War I, you were un-American. Not only that, but it's so useful for states to be able to round up critics that they kept rounding people up. And so once World War I was over, they rounded up Rosa Luxemburg. They rounded up outspoken editors. They rounded up more union leaders. They rounded up anarchists. And I don't mean people blowing things up. I mean people who believed in anarchism, which meant less government or no government. They rounded up socialists. So fast forward to the 1970s, people contested it and contested it. Some of the worst aspects of it were dropped, but others of the worst aspects were kept because the First Amendment is dangerous. It's dangerous to elites because it means that ideas can flow freely and ideas are powerful, right? Ideas are powerful. A powerful idea, like Gandhi took an idea and overcame the most powerful colonial power on the planet. So elites hate freedom of speech, and they like the First Amendment. They didn't get rid of it, as unconstitutional as it was, because it's really a handy thing to keep in your back pocket. So the First Amendment was strengthened recently. And if you go to Wikipedia, I'm sorry, the Espionage Act was strengthened. If you go to Wikipedia, you'll see how there was this dormant period when everyone knew what a bad law it was. And by the way, the Espionage Act, the penalty for being convicted is life in prison or execution. Life in prison or execution for speech, for First Amendment protected words. So Daniel Ellsberg was arrested under the Espionage Act. Many of you remember that he was a Rand Corporation employee. He's a friend of mine, disclosure. He's one of the Americans I admire the most. And he admires Julian Assange, and he admires Edward Snowden. And Ellsberg did exactly what Assange is accused of doing. He stole classified documents because they showed that the American people were being lied to about the Vietnam War. And he released them, he leaked them, is what journalists call it, to the New York Times and the Washington Post in the interest of public service. That was what motivated him. And he risked spending his life in prison in order to let the American people know that they were being lied to about the war in Vietnam. So he did not ultimately go to prison, and that was due to just good luck. It was a mistrial. But for the rest, and now he's considered an American hero, and people are very, very grateful. The war ended, and probably thousands of people were saved from going to a war that people were being lied about. The war ended sooner than it would have because of the release of the Pentagon Papers. So now fast forward to the 90s, the 80s, 90s, and aughts, and you get the Espionage Act being leveled against people like Thomas Drake, who was a whistleblower about NSA surveillance of American people. And you get Snowden being accused of the Espionage Act, Chelsea Manning accused under the Espionage Act, and now, of course, Julian Assange is most worried about being accused under the Espionage Act. There are charges that were dropped, that were sexual offense charges from Sweden. He's no longer in jeopardy of that. He didn't commit a crime in Britain, so he's not in jeopardy of that. He is most frightened of being extradited to the US and being charged under the Espionage Act. All right, so let me take a breath and answer some questions here before I go ahead and read the indictment. Louis David, Thank you. Chai with Khan says you are right in so many ways. Thank you. Louis David said corporate fascism is now quickly taking steps to enslave us all. Daisy 351 says, yes, can't be talking no garbage about the USA government. Ice Hedge says, makes me wonder how many people were involved to push that through that didn't question the First Amendment. That is a really good question. They're all great observations. Jesper Bogue says, history repeats itself, indeed. Lorem's one says, anarchists and outside agitators blackballed for being a commie. That's also true. The Red Scare of the 50s tried to use the Espionage Act as well. And that we look back on that as a dark time, a stupid time in America's history. My phone still says, okay. Why can't we have nice people in governments? Well, I can't answer that. I wish I could. The Rainmaking Network, I love the Rainmaking Network. A wonderful supporter of DailyClout says, you rock. Thank you. You rock. Ice Hedge, thank you, says Naomi Wolf for Prez. I appreciate that. I'm not running. People are just, or at least Senator, you're so sweet. And why is the Espionage Act legal? Who created it? So Rainmaking, if you go back to the beginning of the video, I gave some background on the Espionage Act. It was passed when Woodrow Wilson was trying to get the United States into war, and anti-war activists were speaking out against the war, basically, and the military needed to put a stop to that. Thank you, Naomi, for standing up for free speech. Thank you. All right, so we've had this love fest, and I'm grateful to you. And I'm just going to take a pause and say, if you like the fact that we read the bills and explain them, then please do what Rainmaking did, do what some of the commentators have done. Go over to dailyclout.io and please become members or make a donation. We have wonderful people who make monthly donations of like $10, $5. We got a lovely donation of $200. It all counts because it costs. Donate, 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 says the Rainmaking Network. Thank you. I'm so grateful, and I'm really going to second that because these videos take a lot of resources to research. And also, if you go to DailyClout, you'll see that we are running something called BillCam, which takes a lot of money to offer you every month. It's every state or federal bill, easily searchable, that you can share through social media, tweet the bill sponsor, tweet the rep, no more smoke-filled rooms. But we do have fixed costs of about $1,300 a month just to keep that flowing. So we really do need your contributions, your membership to keep us going. Thank you, Naomi. Heart back to you. All right, let's get back into the indictment now, everybody. I love you, and we will make this work. We will save this democracy. All right, so this is the indictment. We'll post it in this video. It says, in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia, so it's Alexandria, and it's the United States of America versus Julian Paul Assange, the defendant. And it's one count. It's a conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. So as you'll see, the first part of this indictment, you know, it's real. I mean, hacking a computer is illegal. And we'll get to that. But the second half of it is really what you'll see is kind of whipping up illegality out of journalism. So this is a grand jury indictment, and the grand jury charges general allegations. One, Chelsea Manning, formerly known as Bradley Manning, was an intelligence analyst in the U.S. Army who was deployed to Forward Operating Base Hammer in Iraq. Two, Manning held a, quote, top secret security clearance and signed a classified information non-disclosure agreement acknowledging that the unauthorized disclosure or retention or negligent handling of classified information could cause irreparable injury to the United States or be used to the advantage of a foreign nation. Now, that is true. I mean, of all the rights and wrongs of Wikileaks, the one thing that I do believe as a profound free speech advocate is a real issue is that classified documents do exist. People do make a commitment when they handle classified documents to not disclose them. There are often national security issues at stake with classified information. At the same time, I can tell you that journalists for decades handle classified documents that are leaked to them, and never before have had to fear being swept up in criminality. The risk is usually being taken by the person leaking or by the person violating their top secret clearance, as Daniel Ellsberg did, as Chelsea Manning did, certainly. So that's a real thing. But Chelsea Manning has been prosecuted and convicted for that. So that is a thing. Chelsea Manning had a top secret clearance. She decided to violate it in the interest of the public. I would like to live in a world in which the risks and the rewards were balanced, because in retrospect, a lot of bad things have been classified, harms to the American people, and we do need whistleblowers, but there's been a war on whistleblowers, and so they're being prosecuted much more harshly than ever before. By the way, in case you think this is a Republican thing, I just want to note that Bush started to escalate the prosecution of whistleblowers, but Obama was the one and his Justice Department who went crazy prosecuting whistleblowers. 3, Executive Order number 13526 and its predecessor orders defined the classification levels assigned to classified information. Under the executive order, information may be classified as, quote, secret if its unauthorized disclosure reasonably could be expected to cause serious damage to national security. Further, under the executive order, classified information can generally only be disclosed to those persons who've been granted an appropriate level of U.S. government security clearance and possess a need to know the classified information in connection to their official duties. All right, well, if that, yes, I mean, I do believe there is a need for government, even in a healthy democracy, to classify some national security information. Certainly releasing the names of operatives can endanger them. And this is something we saw with the Valerie Plame release of classified information, which, by the way, is the same thing. And Dick Cheney is not in jail. So he released classified information, but he is not in jail. But if you, again, if you stuck to this level of, you know, classified material has to always be radioactive for everyone, you wouldn't have journalism. You would have no national security journalism, which is a point that national security investigative reporter Jane Mayer makes often. And again, I can't stress enough personal experience. I was around the White House. I was married to a Clinton operative. I, worked for the vice president. I never handled classified information. I don't have a clearance. But I was a journalist in Washington in those years, and literally every dinner party with high-level journalists, they were talking about classified information because people were leaking. And that was called journalism. And the journalists weren't in fear of a knock on the door, of being swept up in a dragnet for reporting what had been leaked to them. So that's the danger here, okay. Julian Assange was the founder and leader of the Wikileaks website. Notice how they say leader and not editor. The Wikileaks website publicly solicited submissions of classified, censored, and other restricted information. Well, this is important wording because this here on page 2 conflates classified and censored. They're not the same. Assange, who did not possess a security clearance or need to know, was not authorized to receive classified information of the United States. Well, again, neither is any journalist who has ever reported on classified information that was leaked to him or her by someone with a security clearance. 6, so they're treating him not like a journalist. 6, they're treating him rather like a government employee who signed a non-disclosure agreement and violated his clearance in handling classified information, which he isn't. 6, in or around January 2010 and May 2010, Manning downloaded 4 nearly complete databases from departments and agencies of the United States. These databases contained approximately 90,000 Afghanistan war-related significant activity reports, 400,000 Iraq war-related significant activities reports, 800 Guantanamo Bay detainee assessment briefs, which you really haven't read much about, and 250,000 US Department of State cables. Many of these records were classified pursuant to Executive Order 13526 or its predecessor orders. Manning provided the records to agents of Wikileaks so that Wikileaks could publicly disclose them on its website. Again, Channing leaked them, illegal, certainly criminal, to an editor, to a third party, just like people have been doing to reporters and publishers for time immemorial. WikiLeaks publicly released the vast majority of the classified records on its website in 2010 and 2011. So that is not a crime. I mean, it's not a crime to publish classified material. And even the Espionage Act doesn't say it's a crime. 7, on or about March 8th, 2010, Assange agreed to assist Manning in cracking a password stored on U.S. Department of Defense computers connected to the Secret Internet Protocol Network, a U.S. government network used for classified documents and communications as designated according to Executive Order 13526 or its predecessor orders. So now you get into what he did do, allegedly, that isn't journalism, which is helping to crack a password. Hacking. 8, Manning, who had access to the computers in connection with her duties as an intelligence analyst, was also using the computers to download classified records to transmit to WikiLeaks. Army regulations prohibited Manning from attempting to bypass or circumvent security mechanisms on government-provided information systems and from sharing personal accounts and authentication such as passwords. So again, Manning's wrongdoing, right? 9, the portion of the password Manning gave to Assange to crack was stored as a hash value in a computer file that was accessible only by users with administrative level privileges. Manning did not have administrative level privileges and used special software, namely a Linux operating system, to access the computer file and obtain the portion of the password provided to Assange. Again, Manning did this certainly illegal thing. Assange didn't do it yet. 10, cracking the password would have allowed Manning to log onto the computers under a username that did not belong to her. Such a measure would have made it more difficult for investigators to identify Manning as the source of disclosures of classified information. Again, Manning was trying to conceal her identity in hacking this computer and getting access to these databases. So it's paragraph after paragraph of what Manning did. We're still waiting to see what Assange did. 11, prior to the formation of the password cracking agreement, Manning had already provided WikiLeaks with hundreds of thousands of classified records that she downloaded from departments and agencies of the United States, including the Afghanistan war-related significant activities reports and Iraq war-related significant activities reports. Again, Manning, and we know that. You said that earlier. 12, at the time he entered into this agreement, Assange knew that Manning was providing WikiLeaks with classified records containing national defense information of the United States. Assange was knowingly receiving such classified records from Manning for the purpose of publicly disclosing them on the WikiLeaks website. Really think about this. This is page 3, section 12. It's literally saying an editor knowingly opened an email from someone who had hacked a government computer who shouldn't have, someone with a security clearance who violated it, and that editor agreed to receive more of that information and publish it. This literally is what editors do in a free society. They are not the ones hacking the computer. They are not the ones violating their security clearances. They're not the ones signing the NDA. This is called journalism, and it has never been criminalized before for reporters to retweet, basically, to release, to publish classified material that was established with the New York Times publication of the Pentagon Papers. But over and over again, publishers publish articles based on classified material until there has been this crackdown in the last decade or so. 13. For example, on March 7, 2010, Manning and Assange discussed the value of the Guantanamo Bay detainee assessment briefs. And on March 8, 2010, before entering the password cracking agreement, Manning told Assange that she was, quote, throwing everything she had on JTF Gitmo at Assange now. Manning also said, quote, after this upload, that's all I really have got left. To which Assange replied, quote, "Curious eyes never run dry in my experience," end quote. Following this, between March 28, 2010 and April 9, 2010, Manning used a United States Department of Defense computer to download the US Department of State cables that WikiLeaks later released publicly. So again, I've now read, I'm on to page 3, on to page 4. There's nothing yet that says that Assange hacked into the computer himself. It says that he was receptive in a coded, veiled, non-incriminating way to a source leaking to him, which is what his website does. And it's called journalism. Yes, you're not supposed to encourage your sources to hack into computers, but that too is not a crime. It's bad journalism. It's risky journalism. It's not a criminal act. Count 1. And I can't stress enough, the crimes here are real. They are committed by Chelsea Manning. And you could say that the treason too is real, but it's committed by Chelsea Manning. I personally think, you know, you haven't heard a lot about the fact that it's Guantanamo cables that were released and published by WikiLeaks. But, you know, that's really been brushed over. And everyone's talking about, you know, Hillary Clinton's emails or Russiagate. But to me, as a reporter and as someone who's been to Guantanamo, that's really the thing that was that has led to this journalist being arrested. Guantanamo is an abomination with every kind of illegality taking place, and those cables would name those illegalities and name the people committing them. So to avoid those people going to jail, this editor is being described as having committed a crime, but so far in the pages I've read, there's no crime. Page 4, the general allegations set forth in paragraphs 1 through 13 are re-alleged and incorporated into this count as though fully set forth herein. 15, beginning on or about March 2nd, 2010, and continuing thereafter till on or about March 10th, 2010. So it's just like 8 days. The exact date being unknown to the grand jury, both dates being approximate and inclusive in an offense begun and committed outside of the jurisdiction of any particular state or district of the United States, the defendant Julian Assange, who will be first brought to the Eastern District of Virginia, did knowingly and intentionally combine, conspire, confederate, and agree with other co-conspirators known and unknown to the grand jury to commit an offense against the United States, to wit. All right, so he's conspiring. Let me note also that page 4 acknowledges that he's not a US citizen and the crime did not take place in the United States. And this is why Noam Chomsky is upset. It's the broad reach of US law that can say, well, you're being sheltered by the Ecuadorians, you're in Britain, the Swedes have stopped trying to prosecute you, but we're gonna extradite you and get you, even though nothing you did happened in the United States of America. A, to knowingly access a computer without authorization and exceeding authorized access. But did he? Did Assange access it? It's unclear from this indictment. To obtain information that has been determined by the United States government pursuant to an executive order and statute to require protection against unauthorized disclosure for reasons of national defense and foreign relations, namely documents relating to the national defense classified up to the secret level with reason to believe that such information so obtained could be used to the injury of the United States and the advantage of any foreign nation. And to willfully, and this is where it's journalism, communicate, deliver, transmit, and cause to be communicated, delivered, or transmitted the same to any person not entitled to receive it, and willfully retain the same and fail it to deliver it to the officer or employee entitled to receive it. Pay attention to the bottom of page 4, everyone. It's not clear to me yet from this indictment that Assange was the one who tried to hack into the computer. It's clear that Chelsea Manning did. But what page 4 at the bottom says is that you are conspiring, right, to commit an offense against the United States if you take this illegally obtained by the person breaking their classification status data, which all reporters used to do, and willfully communicate, deliver, transmit, and cause to be communicated, delivered, or transmitted to any person not entitled to receive it. Meaning, the New York Times did the same thing. The Guardian did the same thing. I did the same thing when I retweeted the New York Times' article initially about the WikiLeaks document dump, about Guantanamo, about the NSA. This says, if you are a journalist, an editor, a news outlet, and you cause transmission of this material that has been leaked to you, to anyone who isn't holding a clearance, meaning probably 99.99999% of the New York Times audience or the Guardian's audience doesn't have classified entitlement to read classified material that's been leaked to the Guardian that they've published, then you are conspiring and you've committed a crime. So the bottom of page 4, journalists, wake up. This criminalizes you. Editors, wake up. All these commentators who are sniping from the Washington Post to, to the Wall Street Journal, sniping at Assange. Wake up and read this indictment. This is you. If you ever publish anything that has been leaked to you by someone who's broken their own security clearance, this is you. You are conspiring to commit a crime. Number 5, page 5, to intentionally access a computer without authorization and exceeding authorized access to obtain information from a department and agency of the U.S. in furtherance of a criminal act in violation of laws of the United States, that is a violation of Title 18. So yes, if indeed Assange tried himself to access the classified computer, which I can't tell from this he did, then that is indeed a crime. The government owns the computer for sure. Purpose and object of the conspiracy. And here is where it gets so scary, everybody. Page 5, 16 to the end, just 2 more pages. 16, the primary purpose of the conspiracy was to facilitate Manning's acquisition and transmission of classified information related to the national defense of the United States so that WikiLeaks could publicly disseminate the information on its website. In other words, journalism. In other words, journalism, right? That is what is called journalism, publication. That's what you do. You're transmitting on a website or in print. Manners and means of the conspiracy. Now they're totally recategorizing journalism as the conspiracy. 17, Assange and his co-conspirators used the following ways, manners, and means, among others, to carry out this purpose. 18, it was part of the conspiracy that Assange and Manning used the Jabber online chat service to collaborate on the acquisition and dissemination of classified records and to enter into the agreement to crack the password stored on the U.S. Department of Defense computers connected to the secret Internet Protocol network. Again, yes, that would be illegal. Using a chat service would not be illegal. Trying as an editor, you're not supposed to do it. As a reporter, you're not supposed to get the classified records yourself, but nothing prevents you from publishing them. 19, it was part of the conspiracy that Assange and Manning took measures to conceal Manning as the source of the disclosure of classified records to WikiLeaks. Oh my God, that is called protecting your sources. Journalism 101. You're supposed to protect your sources. Reporters have gone to jail to not be forced by the government to reveal their sources. And at the bottom of page 5, section 19, this indictment reframes reporters protecting their sources, right? Standard ethical journalism, which allows journalism to happen, reframes it as a criminal conspiracy. And how did they do that? Including by removing usernames from the disclosed information and deleting chat logs between Assange and Manning, meaning by protecting his sources, right? So every editor in America, every reporter, you better be scared by the bottom of page 5 of this indictment, because if you do anything now to protect your sources, if you remove their name, if you don't disclose their name, if you delete emails with their name, you could be accused of a criminal conspiracy in protecting your sources. 20, it was part of the conspiracy that Assange encouraged Manning to provide information and records from departments and agencies in the United States. Again, I think it's unethical and wrong for editors and reporters to say, go commit a crime, and their legal teams don't let them do that. But absolutely, from Edward Snowden to Glenn Greenwald to The Guardian to the New York Times to Daniel Ellsberg, when a source that is leaking classified information finds a reporter, the reporter does encourage that person to get more of the story. It just does. I mean, that's how journalism works. And so now this too is part of a conspiracy. 21, it was part of the conspiracy that Assange and Manning used a special folder on a cloud Dropbox of Wikileaks to transmit classified records containing information related to the national defense of the United States. Again, in a digital era, every single editor of every news outlet, every publisher, everyone who published Wikileaks, The Guardian, the New York Times, the New York Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, they use Dropbox, right? They do. They use folders that say things like WikiLeaks or that have, a code name for their source. They use a special folder. And Section 21 makes this sound so ominous. It is like literally how you do journalism with a confidential source who's leaking to you. You put it somewhere on your computer in a folder. And this is now part of a conspiracy to commit a crime. Acts in furtherance of the conspiracy, 22. In order to further the goals and purposes of the conspiracy, Assange and his co-conspirators committed overt acts, including but not limited to the following. 23. On or about March 2nd, 2010, Manning copied a Linux operating system to a CD. That was Manning's crime, to allow Manning to access a U.S. Department of Defense computer file that was accessible only to users with administrative level privileges. Okay, Manning did that. Assange didn't. 24, on or about March 8th, 2010, Manning provided Assange with part of a password stored on the U.S. Department of Defense computers connected to the secret Internet Protocol network. Manning did that. Assange didn't do it. Manning said, here's part of the password. 25, on or about March 10th, 2010, Assange requested more information from Manning related to the password. Assange indicated that he had been trying to crack the password by stating that he had, quote, no luck so far, end quote. So that's the end of this indictment. That's it. And I mean, that's it. That's the indictment. It's 6 pages. And for that, Julian Assange may be going to prison for the rest of his life. I think it's really, really extraordinary because it doesn't say that he's the one who committed the crime of hacking into the computer. It doesn't. It seems that Manning, who clearly did a lot of illegal things and has been tried and convicted for them, Manning said to him, these files are here, and here's this password. I've got part of it. And then Assange, according to this, tried to get the rest of it and couldn't do it. And the rest of this indictment literally criminalizes journalism. So it's chilling. It's frightening. It's very, very, very scary. And I hope that all of the people who are mocking Julian Assange from their positions of privilege and safety now understand that tomorrow this could be them. So now that's 43 minutes. You guys are still hanging in there. I appreciate it. Emma Kinaz says, Ex Machine Av 2, says, what I've been asking people who vilify Assange, Wikileaks, and the whistleblowers who expose government malfeasance is what they consider to be the proper way to report these crimes. Well, thank you, Ex Machina V2. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing. This, you've said it. This is what breaks my heart. This is what people don't understand. Assange might not be the poster boy for the First Amendment. He's not that personable. He's a little weird. Certainly he had, accusations against him for sexual offenses in Scandinavia that have been dropped, notably. He's not as relatable as Daniel Ellsberg, but it doesn't matter. The First Amendment doesn't say nice editors. The First Amendment doesn't say personable whistleblowers. The First Amendment protects all speech. And what makes me crazy right now is that people are saying, oh, he's a bad guy. But that isn't the point. The point is the government, in the history of censorship, and I've just written a book about censorship called Outrages that's coming out soon, the government always goes after people who seem unpopular or marginal as a way, and then everyone like falls for the trick of, oh yeah, he's a bad guy, or that's hate speech. Okay, lock him up, right? And then there's that precedent. And literally 6 months later, they come for you. Like literally with the closing of German society in 1933, it took 6 months. In Israel, it took like less than 5 years for Israeli civil society to be closed down once they invented this crime, incitement, and undermined any free speech rights they had. And so American journalists, you know, you're going to risk a little bit of courage standing up against this indictment, right? It's not the same as standing up for Assange, but standing up against this faulty, misleading, scary indictment. That is literally standing up for your own necks, because there is no such thing as staying on the right side of the censor once you do away with freedom of speech, because whatever you report, if you report anything critical about the government and they don't like you, they can come get you next time. They can call it incitement. They can call it a conspiracy to injure the government. Listen to the wording of the Espionage Act. It's literally anything scurrilous, right? Naomi, you're scurrilous. You're whipping up all these people to be upset at the government. That's scurrilous behavior, criticizing a form of the US government. And they could knock on my door and take me to jail forever if this is allowed to stand. And you too. So let's see. Protect what's true. Accusations of rape were dropped. So I'm not going to assess whether they should have been or not, because that never went to trial. And I believe that any survivor of alleged sexual abuse should have her day in court, or his day in court. But they were indeed dropped, and that is worth knowing. By the way, I should disclose that I visited Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian Embassy in about 2014 or 2015. And it was a very heartbreaking experience. I mean, the man was living in one room, and he had been for years, and he couldn't see the sun, and he couldn't walk out and breathe fresh air or exercise, and he could never go home again. And he hadn't been tried or convicted of anything, and he was in prison. And not only that, but it was very scary as a reporter to visit him, because even though I was just reporting, right, I wasn't even like helping him. I was engaged in free speech protected reporting. When I walked in, there was a municipal policeman, probably with the intelligence services in Britain, who greeted me by name. And then when I left, that policeman said, "See you again." And it's like kind of intimidating, kind of scary. And as he got targeted more and more, I know as a journalist, it chilled me, because I was given the opportunity to go meet with him again and to go visit a colleague of his, and I backed down. And now I don't even receive classified information or information that could be classified, because I'm so scared of the Espionage Act. And I promise you, there are important stories that have been lost because I no longer feel, as an American journalist, safe or free to report on classified information or information that might be classified that comes into my inbox. And I tell people not to leak to me if it's classified, which is not journalism. It's not. I say that with shame. Jordan Allen says, "I blame all who actively engage in breaking the international law. Killing civilians is terrorism, no matter who is taking the orders." I totally agree with you, and international law agrees with you. Rainmaking Network, this chilling effect is so profound. Rainmaking, it is. And I really hope you all, listened and heard graph by graph, and you will tell your friends and tell your social media. That indictment, I mean, did you hear a crime in it? Like maybe he shouldn't have tried to even say he would try to open something that Manning sent him, but it's Manning who committed the crimes. It's Manning who's been prosecuted and convicted. It's Manning who's serving her time, and probably that's appropriate. But Julian Assange acted like a publisher from everything I've seen. No law on the First Amendment, exactly. Jonathan KX says, but the soldiers will be used as scapegoats for the leaders, always the case. And you saw that with Abu Ghraib, right? And with Guantanamo. The people who were sentenced were low level. The people who created the policy and instructed the soldiers to commit these crimes are teaching at Berkeley, or have lucrative jobs in think tanks to this day. Protect what's true. FYI, it's a crime to classify crimes. Most of what was leaked were atrocious, illegally classified. Protect what's true. I'm so glad you made that point, and it's one that I should have made early on. You're 1,000% right. Many people, including Jane Mayer, who's very respected as a national security reporter, have made the point that since the 80s, there's been this fervid overclassification, and often of crimes that the United States has committed. So certainly with the Guantanamo cables, which is a big part of what Chelsea Manning was leaking, and certainly with material related probably to acts of war on other war fronts that Chelsea Manning was releasing. And we saw with collateral murder, right, which was released by WikiLeaks. These were crimes. And absolutely, the United States government, again and again, in the last 20 years especially, has learned its lesson from the Pentagon Papers and has been classifying crimes that it commits. An example of this is, remember when there was a movement to try to prosecute people who had engaged in torture. In Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib, the sources and methods of torture were classified so that anyone leaking that anyone was being tortured would be committing a crime and facing even though they were leaking a crime, right? So it's preemptive classification to protect criminals or people who've committed crimes in the US government. All right. I'm not blaming the soldiers, says Lorem S1 to Jonathan KX. I believe it was the Nuremberg trials that a statute was created that soldiers could not perform war crimes and say it was orders. They put the onus on the soldier. It's interesting. We were just talking about the Nuremberg trial today. And I was asking a 7-year-old, who did he think should be blamed when Nazis followed orders in the Nuremberg trial, the soldiers or the people who gave the order? And we finally decided that both. But certainly I believe the ones in power who give the illegal order or who classify the crime are committing the greater crime. Soldiers, look, I'm married to a veteran. They have a shit deal. They're told to commit crimes. And if they don't obey, they lose their pensions, they lose their career, they can be put in prison. They can be dishonorably discharged, lose their benefits. It's a terrible system. And that's all the more reason I think we protect our brave men and women in uniform by going after, by publishing leaked documents that show when crimes are being committed, because it should not be the people tasked with carrying out criminal acts who are held accountable solely. It should certainly be the people who are creating the policy or classifying crimes. Insight says, Naomi, can you please get on Jimmy Dore? I'm afraid I don't know who that is. So go ahead and help me and suggest that to him or her. App Batter says that was Obama's responsibility regarding Abu Ghraib prosecutions. Yes, it was. And Obama, I always say I'm nonpartisan and that, my client is the Constitution. But Barack Obama is, much as a lot of progressives like him, they're closing their eyes to what an absolute violation of whistleblower freedoms happened under his watch. Protect What's True says, Naomi, please hook up with a journalist and activist participating in Unity 4 includes Daniel Ellsberg. Thank you. Well, I adore Daniel Ellsberg, so I will reach out to him. And Jasper Bogue says Bush. And yeah, Bush hyped it up. Bush definitely was responsible for very bad law like the Defense Authorization Act that made it possible for him to hold without charge or trial anyone who even reported on Abu Ghraib or Al-Qaeda. But Obama made it worse. Like everything Bush created to punish reporters and whistleblowers, Obama heightened and his Justice Department heightened. So that is almost 55 minutes, and I would love to stay here with you all evening. You guys are an amazing audience. It's an amazing conversation. You're so smart. Your comments are so good, and they're all right here on the right in the chat, and they'll stay there. But listen, before I go, please, if you think it's valuable, I just read you the indictment, right? There's so much hyperventilating about Julian Assange right now. Who reads you the indictment? DailyClout reads the document, right? We read the primary sources. We respect you enough to know that you can follow it and understand it with a little bit of explication. We embed the primary documents. And so now you know that there is virtually no crime in those 7 pages. There is a crime of there's a crime of trying to help a source open a file with classified information. He shouldn't have done that, no question. But the Espionage Act is not the right law to prosecute him under. The Espionage Act is a bad, bad, bad law that has no place in the United States of America. It should be repealed. Categorically, it should be repealed. And the First Amendment should reign supreme. And, you know, WikiLeaks should go on to publish another day, just like the New York Times did after the very, very similar publication of the Pentagon Papers. I would say to WikiLeaks, one thing you guys don't do that I wish you would is redact the names of operatives and their addresses. You know, you may not like it that people are in the intelligence services, but there is, you know, people are putting themselves in danger. Their sources are in danger, and you can do great journalism. You know, it's still a very socially valuable service to release the documents, but just redact the names and of sources and assets, so people who, you know, are not the ones instigating the policy don't get killed. I think that's fair, and it's the same policy the New York Times publishes. You know, or abides by, and it's legitimate journalism. But there you are. That's what we have covered. You now know that page 4, 5, 6 and half of 7 of Assange's indictment totally criminalizes the act of publication of journalism. There's no question about it. So please tell your friends. If you agree with me, send a comment to DailyClout. We'll post this video on DailyClout. If you disagree, comment, but we'll be embedding the actual article. And please subscribe here. But go on over to DailyClout, press that red membership button. It's $3.99 a month. As one of my favorite supporters of our project said, what's $3.99 a month to save democracy? And help us do this important work with your help and with your participation to keep us all free. This is Naomi Wolf with DailyClout, and the subject has been the indictment of Assange, the Espionage Act, and the beautiful First Amendment. See you all next week.